Sixth, that man has the earmarks of the lower animal life in his body, which must prove that he sprang from those lower forms of animal life, the earmarks of which he bears. Though briefly stated, these six propositions contain all the arguments given by the evolutionist in support of his belief that the progenitor of man was one of the four kinds of the anthropoid ape. We will consider these propositions in the following chapters. First, the general proposition that the simpler forms always precede the more complex forms is perfectly true as we believe. Especially is this true in the working of the human mind, and so in the experience of the race. But a further proposition that the simpler forms always, or even ever produce the more complex forms is, to our mind, not true. It is denied. And especially is this denied in the matter of the production of the animal kingdom, because it involves an impossibility, as we shall show. In the working of the human brain, the simpler thoughts may be the precursors of more complex thoughts, but they did not cause the thoughts. In the case of the inventor, the simpler machine precedes the wheelbarrow. In the case of the inventor, the simpler machine precedes the more complex machine almost every time. Out of the wheelbarrow came the four-wheeled carriage, it is said. Now, technically, that is not true at all. The wheelbarrow, per se, had nothing whatever to do with the coming of the carriage, but the human mind produced it by reasoning by analogy. Having seen that the wheel will carry the load and revolve and thus make headway, if it is balanced, if it is reasoned that four wheels properly placed will need no balancing and make the same advance with every turn in unison. Just so in every human experience. But the simpler forms never produce the more complex. They may lead up to the more complex forms, but it is the brain that is led, and the brain that produces by reasoning, by induction or analogy. Here is an adequate cause at work to produce an effect. But in the evolutionary scheme there is no cause set up to produce the advancement, only the inherent power stored up in the fat cornstalk, and which is only the vital principle of that form of life. It has to do with that form of life only, no other. And he recommends you see chapter 5. As a matter of fact, we believe the simpler forms of life did precede the more complex forms, not because they were commissioned to build the animal world, but because the earth was not fitted for the more complex forms of life. We deny the simpler forms produce the more complex forms, any more than the wheelbarrow produced the four-wheeled carriage. Second, it is assumed that because changes or variations are constantly occurring in the physical, animal and vegetable worlds, these variations are progressive processes, as if with a definite object in view, and therefore ending when the object had been attained. It was perfection. There are no limits, no boundary lines in the animal world. That genus is as liable to change as variety, and it being a progressive process, variety is as liable to give birth to a new genus as a new variety of the same genus. That no animal was ever created by a creator, but that the whole animal world, including man, just grew up, was produced and developed by virtue of this progressive variation. From the miniature parent cell, the moneron, to man, and that these changes are guided only by the law, of selection, the survival of the fittest, or the struggle for life, whichever form you please, as they are all one and the same thing. They say, mark you, they nowhere give the cause of the development, the impetus that is to inaugurate and produce the new form, only that it is a tendency in nature to change by advancement toward perfection of structure, a continuation of an inherent power stored up in this miniature life cell, the moneuron, and which inherent property is life. Evolution is the sole course set up, being guided by selection. That, because there are variations in the personalities of animals, and these variations constitute varieties when grouped together, these same varieties may keep on varying and, quote, thus after diverging in characteristics until 1,000 or 1,000,000 generations have passed, an entire new genus may have been developed, unquote. Darwin. From the above quotation it will be seen that the whole theory hangs or turns on the word may. He does not say that it will produce a new genus. He does not know that it will, but only claims that it may. Now, the author submits that, for as uncertain and evanescent a thing as a theory, that for any uncertain and so the author submits that, for as uncertain and evanescent a thing as a theory, to rest on so indefinite a supposition as the word may stands for, places the entire proposition in a doubtful category. Even Darwin claimed no more than a bare possibility for his theory, and inasmuch as it has never been verified, that is the sole basis on which it is now called a branch of civic science. Are we, in the face of all nature to the contrary as we see it exemplified daily, and as all history has exemplified it in the past, to accept it as having worked out to confirm the uncertain may as a reality, when neither Mr. Darwin nor any other naturalist has ever seen it thus work out, or even ever to have had a single scintilla of proof that this may had materialized, or ever will materialize, but accept it as truth simply because a few men have, in their metaphysical speculations, suggested that it may have done so long years ago. But since which time nature has changed its plans? So nature's changed its plans? He's asking. Since time which nature has changed its plans? Every observant person must be cognizant of the fact that changes are constantly occurring in nature. Variation and change are specialties of nature, but they are not the only specialties in nature. The law of stability comes in to regulate and limit variation and change the certain boundary lines. Through all the ages one unceasing purpose runs. So we challenge the proposition that variations is the chief factor in the way of cause or excitation of all the different forms of animal life. It would be a very rigid law of nature that would say the acorn shall produce an oak exactly like the parent tree from which the acorn fell. The branches shall be exactly the same in number and likeness, the lower limbs just the same distance from the ground and at a certain age of the tree, and the diverging limbs are to be at the same angle from the trunk, that the branches shall point north, south, east or west, just as perhaps the limbs on the parent tree did, else it is a new species. That is entirely too rigid, too scientific. Nature is not scientific in that way. There are no two oaks exactly alike, but instead oaks are all manners of forms, shapes and sizes, yet all are oaks. No two human faces are alike, perhaps in all the looks like 1,750,000,000 inhabitants of this globe, and probably if all who have ever lived on this globe were here now to be scrutinized, no two could be found just alike. But to be scrutinized, no two could be found just alike, but each one different from all the others. An infinite variation, yet all belong to the genus Homo. There are no two horses exactly alike, all differ from the others, in some minor points perhaps, but all are different from the others, yet they are so nearly alike that anyone who has ever seen a horse can tell a horse the next time he sees one. They are horses, notwithstanding they have been undergoing changes and variations ever since the creation. Their livers may not be alike anatomically, just like the branches of the oak, but they all have livers that perform the same functions in each individuality. Some may be more perfect in size, shape and functional activity than others. There can be no dispute over the well-established fact that there is constantly going on a variation in the animal and vegetable worlds, and by this variation new varieties may be produced. But we affirm that after all these variations have taken place, there are no new genera produced by reason of those variations, but that all are true to the genus of their progenitors. In his Origin of the Species, Mr. Darwin very plainly describes the process and gives this theory as to the variations, and illustrates by citing the sheep in the animal kingdom, the pigeon in the feathered tribe, and the strawberry in the vegetable world, pointing out the great number of varieties in each genus. He maintains that all these varieties, here he uses the term species, that all these varieties, that all of the pigeon originate from the rock pigeon, and ascribes to selection the cause of the variations. Very probably he is right. The author has no discussion on that point, but entirely endorses his doctrine that varieties of any bird, animal, plant may be multiplied ad infinitum by selection, care and environment. Very probably Darwin is right. The author had no discussion on that point, but entirely endorsed his doctrine that varieties of any bird, animal or plant may be multiplied ad infinitum by selection, care and environment. But in all the cases cited, the selection was exercised and enforced by the breeder. It was not a self-executing selection. His argument is long and scientifically minute, but he utterly fails to substantiate his contention, for, be it remembered, when he gets through with his illustrations, all the individualities of all these multiplied varieties, every one of them, are just what they were when he started, viz. sheep, strawberries, and pigeons. No new genera have been produced. Though he has experimented in raising pigeons for 20 years, and in the time has produced some 17 varieties, yet they are all of them pigeons, as he affirms. They are all sheep, or pigeons, or strawberries, just as they were when he began experimenting. There has been neither transition from descent or transmutation after birth, but all variations have occurred inside of the boundary lines of genus. Mr. Darwin cites almost innumerable variations of types, which he calls species, but he never cited a case of new genus having sprung up from ordinary descent. Yet he insists that all species came into existence by ordinary descent, ordinary procreation. Yet he insists that all species came into existence by ordinary descent, ordinary procreation, and entirely repudiates transmutation. Now, Haeckel, Spencer and Huxley insist on transmutation as a means of forming new genera. Thus they do not agree among themselves as to the means by which the necessary end is reached. Dr. Haeckel and Mr. Spencer both say, without progressive heredity and transmutation, our theory of the evolution of the species is not possible. Mr. Darwin is fully convinced and asserts that every trifling variation that occurs, and especially those variations that are so marked and noticeable as to constitute a species, is at all times for the benefit of the individual. He even holds that extinction of a species or a genus by his law of selection, or the survival of the fittest, is highly conservative, because it would give rise to something better, since all organic beings tend to rise in the scale. He says it may metaphorically, he does that word again, it may metaphorically be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, preserving and adding up all that are good, silently and insensibly, whenever and wherever opportunity offers, at the improvement of each organic being. In relation to its organic or inorganic conditions of life. Now, is not that a most remarkable sagacity for a law to exercise? Especially so when the law is formulated by a human being. Just think of it. He is here ascribing to a law the intelligence of deity. But if it is true, how comes it that reversion is notoriously common? Has there been a mistake made by this all-potent law of selection some time in the past generations? Or is it that the great law of heredity asserting itself anew? He has just said that all variations are for the benefit of species. Lamarck was the first to claim an innate and inevitable tendency towards perfection in all organic beings. It is presumed that he means physical, anatomical perfection. If he does, that point seems to have been reached long ago. Now, if there is any such innate tendency in the structure of organic beings as Lamarck tells about, how comes it that there are new varieties, not new genera, springing up in the domesticated animals?